G'day! In this video, we are going to preview the Scourge of Ghyran rules for the Blades of Khorne. Now, the Scourge of Ghyran is offering each faction a set of seasonal rules that will be match play legal for the upcoming General's Handbook, Season 25-26. Specifically to Khorne, you have gained 2 new battle formations, a brand new prayer law, 2 alternative war scrolls, one being for the Mighty Lord of Khorne and the other one being for Blood Crushers. Now, these units will have a separate pitch battle profile and can be substituted for the original war scroll. You cannot use both the Scourge of Ghyran and the original war scroll in the same list. You can use the Scourge of Ghyran war scroll in an Army of Renown, but you can't use it to replace a Regiment of Renown. So without further ado, let's get bloody with the Blades of Khorne. Starting off with your battle formations, and Khorne has gained 2 new battle formations to go alongside the existing 4. Tournament of Skulls promotes a tag team of a non-hero Bloodbound unit alongside a non-hero Khorne Demon unit. In the hero phase, you get to pick one of these unit types, and then while they're wholly within 12 inches of each other, they will get a +1 to wound rolls in combat. I imagine most Khorne armies can easily take advantage of this battle formation unless you are running a bunch of Bloodthirsters. Run a reinforced unit of Blood Warriors behind the chaff line of your Fleshhounds while taking advantage of Murderlust to start denying charges. The +1 to wound bonus may even mitigate the need of having certain heroes like the Aspiring Deathbringer. This is going to work in other ways, for example, having the Claws of Karanak with Bloodletters, maybe even having Skull Crushers or Skull Reapers with Fleshhounds. The Gore-Tide is the other battle formation that you have gained, and it is similar to last season's Field Sergeant rules that's going to add +2 to the movement characteristic, but it isn't restricted to a single hero for the battle. Each turn, a different hero can use the ability, which is going to provide you more flexibility on the battlefield. It also applies to all unit types rather than infantry, meaning it's going to work on your Skull Crushers and your Korgoraths. A hero using the Gore-Tide ability can provide a boost to other Bloodbound heroes like the Mighty Lord of Khorne, which is ideal for Blood Warriors list or a Skull Crushers or a Skull Reaper heavy list that is looking for that aggressive turn, especially with the aid of a Bloodstoker. And if any of these battle formations don't work for you, you still have access to your existing 4 like Murder Host and Brass Stampede. Blades of Khorne have also gained a new prayer law called the Gifts of the Blood God. It can be used instead of the existing one, as you know, the Blood Blessings of Khorne. The 3 prayers are the Gore Flesh, the Runes of Loathing, and the Gifts of Apoplexy. Gore Flesh will let a chosen Blades of Khorne unit ignore the first point of damage in every phase, and on an 8+, it will allow you to choose a second unit to ignore the first point of damage in each phase. This prayer is going to be more useful against armies that spread out damage like Stormcast Eternals or your Seraphon, who can do damage in all phases. And it's going to be less useful for armies that concentrate their damage into certain key phases like the Slaves to Darkness or Sons of Behemoth. Ignoring the first point of damage will trigger afterwards, which means that your demon units will get a chance to ward off the damage before the prayer triggers. This prayer can be useful to protect your smaller heroes as well as units that are built up to soak up damage before they get into combat. Runes of Loathing will give a Blades of Khorne unit a 3-up ward against damage inflicted by spell abilities, prayer abilities, and manifestations, including their fight abilities. This prayer can be incredibly strong against armies like Seraphon with Croak or Tzeentch armies, or even actually any armies that are using particular manifestation laws. The one that comes to mind certainly is Morbid Conjurations, where you could almost completely ignore the damage from the manifestations in that law, assuming that you trigger the 3-up. It can also be great in situations where a spell trigger ability is off the back of a slain model. So the one that comes to mind is the transform to a spawn. If you stop that spell from doing damage, you then stop them from bringing a spawn. That spawn would probably lock you into combat or stop you doing your certain thing. Again, a great little prayer to have up your sleeve. It won't be universally beneficial, but I can see a lot of play with it. You will need to plan ahead, though, and chant this prayer in your hero phase, because the timing of magical intervention will mean that your opponent will get to trigger their spells or their prayer damage before you get a chance. Obviously, it will still help you with manifestations when they go into fight, but to really make the most of this prayer, you need to be chanting it in your hero phase. Gift of Apoplexy is a very interesting prayer that will deal damage to a target enemy unit while they use an ability that isn't a move, charge, or fight ability. Now, you can use this on reactions such as unbinds, commands with some exceptions like redeploy and countercharge. You could use it on casting spells and chanting prayers. A lot of teleport abilities will be triggered that aren't a move, charge, or fight. You have shooting abilities because a shoot is not a fight ability, as well as non-passive abilities that can appear on battle traits, battle formations, heroic traits, and artifacts. Now, this isn't a universal, if you use an ability, the thing triggers. You will need to look at the individual wording of each of the abilities to see if it clarifies, and obviously if it triggers a move, a charge, or a fight, or things like passive abilities as well. It's not going to trigger off that. Some examples of eligible battle traits could be their finest hour from Stormcast Eternals, Cities of Sigmar with their order mechanic, battle formations. One that comes to mind is the Free Spirits from Sylvaneth. This can get dangerous for wizards and priests with a power level of 2 or more, because obviously you'll get more chances to trigger when they cast said spell or prayer. The target unit will need to use the ability, so it won't work on abilities that say, pick a friendly unit to be the target of this ability. And as I already mentioned, it won't work on passive abilities, or it also won't work on abilities that have a persistent trigger. So one that comes to mind and one that's very common would be something like Be'lakor using Dark Master, where you trigger the ability, but then it has these little phases where you trigger said thing. It won't work on that. So when I look at the prayer lore overall, it is interesting. It has 3 different unique prayers. All 3 of them have a low chanting value, being that they are chanting value of 3. If you're running a single priest in your army, you're probably still better off with the Blood Blessings of Khorne. If you're running multiple priests and obviously, bloodbound focused, this might work in your favor. Certainly some more trickier ones versus some of the other prayers from Unholy Flames, Witchbane Curse, and Blood Boil. But there's some interesting things here, definitely worth considering and seeing how these prayers would play around with your faction. We also have 2 alternative war scrolls that you can choose from. You don't have to choose it. If you like your Mighty Lord of Khorne as it is, you can keep running the existing war scroll. No one's forcing you. It is an alternative option. So let's look at the difference between the Scourge of Ghyran and the regular one to see if this one works for you. The Scourge of Ghyran, Mighty Lord of Khorne, has lost an attack on each of its melee profiles, and the companion profile did lose anti-wizard. Although you did gain a bunch of things, you will notice that the Axe of Khorne did gain an extra point of damage, which, even though you've lost some attacks, it will still make the damage output quite strong from the Mighty Lord of Khorne. And it's gained a bunch of abilities like the Reality Splitting Axe, which, from someone like me who's been around since 1st edition, I remember how terrorizing that ability was. It is going to bring back some nightmares or reintroduce people to the terrors of the Mighty Lord of Khorne. This is going to return the Mighty Lord of Khorne as a pressure point on the battlefield that your opponents must respect. And if they don't respect it, you are going to risk losing a centerpiece to the Mighty Lord of Khorne, because the ability is going to trigger on a hero rather than a unit type. So it's going to be great for going out and slaying that Frost Lord on Stonehorn, but not necessarily the Stonehorn Beast Rider. The reality splitting axe also stops replacement units from coming about, so it is a very hard counter to units like Alariel, but it won't stop any abilities that would be getting back up. So, for example, Stormcast Eternal's legendary Tenacity hero trait, it does state something like this unit is not destroyed, but it comes back with a bunch of health or whatever it might be. So it won't stop those types of things, but Alariel, for example, where you're essentially replacing her back on the table, it will stop her. So super interesting there. And with this ability working even with the Mighty Lord of Khorne being destroyed, it can turn some very uncomfortable combats into your favor, and it may stop your opponent from doing a certain strategy or a certain particular sequence of attacks, because they either risk losing their hammer hero on a 5-up to that Mighty Lord of Khorne, or it could come back and bite them later on. So it's a very interesting trade piece, especially if you can get into some expensive heroes on the battlefield. You do lose the +1 to charge rolls for Bloodbound infantry units, but I'm not suspecting that you'll notice this is gone much because you're likely heavily using Murderlust. You also did lose the strike first on another Gore-Chosen unit, but it was only really applicable to a few Bloodbound heroes. So again, I don't think you'll notice this is missing too much. In its place, though, it did gain another rule called the Howl of the Blood-Curdling Savagery. And this ability could be seen as a cheaper countercharge, I guess, because it will cost you 1 command point to trigger instead of 2. There's a lot of great potential use for this ability. If you really needed a charge and you failed it, even with a reroll, you'd get another bite at the apple because this is a combat phase ability. Or if your opponent used an ability in their turn to retreat from combat, for example, Furies or Skaven have that Scurry Away heroic trait, you could then go and use this ability to charge and go catch them despite retreating. There's a heap of other examples of how you could possibly use this. If a unit of, say, Skull Crushers went in and charged and did a heap of mortal damage and it left no units within 3 inches even after the pile-in, you could potentially go and charge again. Being that it's a combat phase ability means that you could use this to charge an opponent even if they countercharge. So their turn, they charged you, or that you charged them, and then they countercharge, and then you can't countercharge a countercharge. So you could then go in and use this howling of the blood-curdling savagery to then charge in the hero phase even after a countercharge. So again, a lot of tricky mechanics that you could play around with and bring in, units that may have now found themselves in an unfavorable combat because they countercharged a tanky, killy unit into you, and we weren't really expecting it, and kind of got caught off guard, or you've got caught off guard, or even an opponent might be looking at you, seeing that you've only got one command point left, and they don't think that you've got the ability to countercharge, and they set up certain charges and certain board states, and then boom, you trigger this ability in the combat phase and still charge, even though you don't have the 2 CP left. Again, a lot of cool, tricky abilities, and I'm sure you can start thinking about how you could make the most of this rule. The other alternative Warscroll is the Scourge of Ghyran version of the Blood Crushers. Again, you don't have to use this version, use the existing version, or you could take this for match play games in the upcoming season. This Scourge of Ghyran version has gained an extra 2 inches of movement compared to the existing Warscroll, which might not seem like a lot at first, but when you then compare it to their peers, it does make Blood Crushers one of the fastest units in your book that isn't a Bloodthirster. The extra move does give them a special niche role for pinning and flanking plays, especially in conjunction with, say, Murderlust, or even tapping into the Bloodthirster or Fury for that 3d6 charge ability. It did lose the charge mortal damage, as well as the anti-infantry ability on its main weapon, but it has gained +1 damage on the charge and anti-cavalry on the mount profile. The +1 to damage, in my opinion, is a better trade, even if you're going into infantry, because it will roughly increase the damage to possibly even double the output for the riders. And it does mean that you have a much higher spike potential when you apply the crit mortals. It does have one new ability, and that is the Brass Stampede. It can't always be relied upon, but if it's successful, the unit can then go in and leapfrog models or reposition to charge something else. It works on a normal charge and a counter charge. The ability doesn't require them to finish in combat with the same unit that they started the move with, and especially on a counter charge, this can be used to push through a screen to get to that vulnerable support hero and possibly force a tough activation order with your opponent. At minimum, it is going to help mitigate some of those low charge rolls and give you extra positioning power with that unit now that you have the improved melee output, especially if you go in and reinforce the Blood Crushers. The improved mobility and the output changes are going to help Blood Crushers win those flanks, especially against other cavalry units, given that they now have anti-cavalry on the mount profile. To summarize the Scourge of Ghyran updates for Khorne, I think you've gotten a whole heap of new interesting rules, with the Mighty Lord of Khorne and the Blood Crushers being the most interesting, at least to me. I can see Tournament of Skull battle formations being popular in tournament lists. I think the new prayer law is interesting enough to explore. I'm not convinced entirely that this is going to be your new preferred prayer law over the existing one, but it does give you a bunch of new tools that you can play with depending on your playstyle. The most exciting update to me is clearly the Mighty Lord of Khorne, and I can't wait to hear about all of the things that you go on to kill with the reality-splitting axe. All of the stories of you stopping units like Alariel returning from the battlefield, and I can't wait to see the look of your opponent's face when you roll that 5-up. If you want a theory craft, list build, and come tell us who is on your head hunting list with that reality-splitting axe, come join us on the AOS Coach Discord server, where we have plenty of spaces to talk about all the factions like Khorne. The link is down below in the episode description. I hope that's been helpful, and don't forget, blood for the Blood God, skulls for the Throne of Khorne. Thanks for hanging around until the end. I hope you enjoyed that video and you walked away with a few new ideas. Now, if you did, I would love it if you pressed like on the video, as well as left me a comment with your thoughts. The conversation will continue over on Discord, and the link is down below in the episode description. I also want to give a massive shout out to the AOS Coach patrons and YouTube members who are supporting the channel and the growth that you're seeing here. So cheers, you are all bloody legends. And until next time, don't roll a double 1 on a spellcast.